Well, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the Fiber Broadband Association, Fiber for Breakfast. We're now on our 43rd episode of 2024. But before we kick off, I'd like to thank Wesco, the platinum sponsor of Fiber for Breakfast. Well, as we're less than 2 weeks out from the election, the politics have gotten very thick in Washington. And unfortunately, the NTI BEAD broadband infrastructure program has become a target for some of the political rhetoric. So I encourage you to remind your congressional representatives that the bipartisan infrastructure law is bipartisan. Let me repeat, the bipartisan infrastructure law is bipartisan. The NTI, led by Assistant Secretary Alan Davidson, has done a phenomenal job and has been ahead of schedule on everything that has been within their control. NTI delivered the BEAD notice of funding opportunity ahead of schedule. All 56 states and territories have signed up and are participating in the program. That's no small feat. All 56 of these states and territories have set up state broadband offices and all have delivered their initial proposals to NTI prior to the deadline. NTI staff field reps across the country. NTI has now approved 55 of the 56 initial proposals, with the final state approval coming in the next few weeks. You can argue that the distribution of funding was flawed, as some states have hundreds of millions left over for non-deployment, while some of the big square states came up short. But that's a function of the FCC maps that NTI was required to use by statute. Further, NTI continues to hold firm on its fiber preference. So they're holding firm on their fiber preference using a technology waterfall model that gets fiber to every location possible before considering fixed wireless access projects and other technologies. We are building out our nation's critical infrastructure. Fiber delivers on long-lasting performance, resiliency, reliability, sustainability that will elevate the quality of life for generations to come. So please have your representatives in Washington reach out to Alan Davidson and NTI and say thank you for their hard work and efforts during this historic moment in our nation's history. And FBA is doing its part by continuing our nationwide roadshow with our next Fiber Connect workshop coming up in Albuquerque, New Mexico on November 7th. And we'll be talking about tribal broadband and other things there, so please join us. And then for our premier members, we look forward to seeing you in the Keys on December 9th and 10th. Also, please join me today at noon Eastern on Drew Clark's Broadband Breakfast, where I will be discussing satellite broadband and BEAD. I put a link in the webinar in the chat, so if you want to join that webinar here in about an hour and a half, or I guess, 2 hours, please do that. So look for that link to that webinar. That brings us to today's Fiber for Breakfast. Our guest today is Ryan Kudera, Finley Engineering, and he's going to talk about the 4 steps of successfully navigating complex permitting processes. Before I formally introduce today's guest, I'd like to introduce David Norris from our team, who's going to walk us through some housekeeping items.
Thank you, Gary, and good morning to everyone who has joined us today. Before I go over a few logistics, we'd like to once again thank our platinum sponsor, Fiber for Breakfast, Wesco. Now, if you would please keep in mind, all participants are in listen-only mode. To ask a question, please use the question box, which is located within the control panel on the side of your screen in the upper right. We will host a Q&A session with our panelists at the end of today's presentation. This presentation is also being recorded and will be available on FBA's website within 24 to 48 hours. You can find that in the recordings section of the events tab under the Fiber for Breakfast drop-down option. At the conclusion of today's presentation, you'll be prompted to complete a brief feedback survey. Please take a moment to do so. We appreciate the input. And with that, I will pass things back over to Gary to once again introduce our panelists and get things started. Gary?
Thanks, David. Good morning. I'm Gary Bolton, the President and CEO of the Fiber Broadband Association. Last week on Fiber for Breakfast, our guests were Dr. Amanda Weinstein and Dr. Adam Dewberry from the Center of Rural Innovation, or affectionately called CORI, who discussed their latest research study, Beyond Connectivity, the Role of Broadband in Rural Economic Growth and Resilience. Their research shows that communities with fiber and high broadband utilization experience a GDP growth rate of 44%. GDP growth rate of 44%, alongside an 18% increase in per capita income. That is huge. So if you missed that session, you can go to the FBA website and watch the replay. Today on Fiber for Breakfast, our guest is Ryan Kudera, from Finley Engineering, who's going to discuss the 4 steps to successfully navigating complex permitting processes. Ryan joined Finley in 2022 and serves as a manager of client services. Prior to Finley, Ryan served as the broadband director for the state of Wyoming. Ryan has served in many roles in telecom, broadband, and the energy sector during his 25-year career with positions including field operations, instruction, economic development, regulation, and finance, with a continued focus on rural broadband in the Rocky Mountain West. Welcome, Ryan, and for our audience, please type in your questions to go, and we'll work those into discussion. With that, I will turn things over to Ryan.
Hey, good morning. Thanks, Gary. Appreciate being here. Thanks to Wesco and everybody involved with the Fiber Broadband Association. I've been involved for several years, and it's a pleasure to be back. So today we'll take a look at the 4 steps of navigating the permit process successfully. Go ahead and move on to the next slide. So step 1, where the fiber roams. So we'll look at the effective fiber route planning. Go ahead. So here we look at a fiber runs through it. So fiber routes determine permitting. So because of that, we need to plan wisely. Those routes include the following list of public lands, railroad right-of-way, pole attachments, private easements, and it can be a myriad of one, it can be a myriad of all. I put one in there, it's called the Department of Defense right-of-way. Generally, if you get within that, you realize you're there unless it's abandoned. However, it's still a right-of-way, it's abandoned, it's available. So look outside the box and see what there is. Person smarter than me said the process is so complicated that in order to demystify it, you need a PhD. It's Alex, of the CEO of the Permitting Institute, and sometimes you need more than one. So let's move on to the next slide. So successful route planning. Just some ideas to throw into your toolbox that if you're in an unfamiliar area, research all the options that may be available. In some cases, in old school, there was a company called Williams. I think it was eventually moved Wiltel. What did they do? They found abandoned pipelines. And what did they do with those abandoned pipelines? Put fiber in it. Well, much like so many convergence items, I believe it's a large conglomerate owns them now. But anyway, if you're unfamiliar, look around. You never know what happens. Second, look at existing areas with a different viewpoint. I live in the mountains. In fact, just came out of hunting camp not too long ago. We have to get through the forest. You have to look around. You have to figure out ways through the downed trees. And literally, you turn to the left, you turn to the right, and suddenly you don't have a way out, and you turn around and there's a clear path to get where you need to go. Take a different look. See what comes up. And then thirdly, contact specific agencies, departments, parties about the installation potential. You never know. You reach out, you kind of say, hey, we're looking at building this area, we're looking to expand. What do you know? You know, talk to the farmers, talk to the ranchers, talk to the business owners. You never know who knows whom that might be able to help. And finally, on successful route planning, engage the community, the area deployment, and present the permitting issue. You know, nothing helps better to resolve an issue than to have multiple people try and understand. And the more think you have involved in an issue, sometimes the easier it becomes. Next slide, please. Step 2. This is an old one, but there again, I fit the bill. The information superhighway, mapping success. Next slide, please. So fiber route mapping. The successful route planning relies upon accurate mapping. Nobody wants more maps. We've seen maps, we've heard maps, we've fought maps, but yet we can't stop looking at them. So one of my projects I had was in West Memphis, Arkansas, and I had a very ambitious GIS person say, hey, I want to look at the traffic patterns around West Memphis, Arkansas. Well, what did he do? He went out, got all the information, put it all together, and made a heat map of all the intersections in West Memphis, Arkansas. And I tell you what, for all the traveling I've done, there's a pretty gnarly intersection underneath I-40 right in the middle of West Memphis, Arkansas. He brought up the fact, the number of fatalities, the number of accidents, the dollar amount of property damage happened within that intersection. really didn't have anything to do with broadband or the fiber we were putting in the ground, other than the fact that it pointed out how dangerous that intersection really was. And because we had the information, I took it to our contractor and said, hey, we all know this area is horrible, but here's the reality of it. And he was able to take that information and went one step further, hired a traffic management team, and as we ran through the area, went off without a hitch, had no issues, had no congestion, worked out really well. So you never know where your mapping information is going to take you. Third, in the success on accurate mapping, landowner issues. Landowners, right-of-ways, easement maps can assist in determining routes. Some of them are public, some of them aren't. Again, this is where relationships come into effect and discussions and kind of working through. It is the long game, but again, fiber is the long game. And then finally, route-specific mapping can identify unforeseen route paths. Just as a hunting trip or a hike in the forest, route-specific mapping can do the same thing. It can help identify various areas, public, private, of where we need to go. One of my favorite sayings from Mr. Dr. Emmett Brown from Back to the Future was, where we're going, we don't need roads. And by the way, this weekend, enjoy. It will be Back to the Future weekend. Next slide, please. All right, fiber route mapping. When is a map more than a map? Well, any of us that lived back in the paper days know that a map can be a lot of things, especially a shade. You get up there, the sun's in your eyes, what do? You spread out the map, you hang it from the window visor, and guess what? A map is more than a map. So secondly, fiber route maps can be utilized in capital application operations. Private, public, grants, we talked, Gary mentioned BEAD. We all know the various applications we can put this in. Again, a map's more than a map. Route maps identify the owners along the desired route path. Again, anybody in the hunting world, in the property world, can go out there and identify ownership very simply, very easily anymore. But they will. They'll help identify the owners, help identify things that help you get your fiber where you want it to go. And electronic copies of the map and right-of-way agreements speed easement access. So I speak to this on a project I had back as a broadband manager, and I've spoken of this before. But basically, company, we had very short window to install, and the company went out and they had electronic copies of their maps, where they were going to go. They had them on tablets, they handed it to their staff, and they handed them a right-of-way agreement. So, hey, you go knock on doors, you tell people we're bringing fiber to the home and what it's going to mean to them. And if they want to agree and they want to have a drop, you have them sign this form. Or if they want to look it over, send the form to them, have it give back to us. Everything was electronic. They stepped out there and they stepped up. Their client stepped up. And in less than 90 days, we were able to deploy over $17 million. And I forget the number of homes that we were able to attach fiber to the home to. And it was a huge lift for everybody involved, but they did it and they got it completed. So again, thinking outside of the box, how you can use your maps, how you can use your electronics, and the things you have to you will help you in your route mapping and your application permitting process. And finally, a map is more than a map when you use it to introduce yourself to a community. You're headed to a community you're not familiar with, just lay out your map. Say, here, this is what we're wanting to do. This is how we're here to help you. As Gary mentioned, 44% growth in GDP in rural America because of fiber. It's easy. Next slide, please. Oh, and I almost forgot. The best part of this slide was the two little vans from Cars. When he had his helper say, honey, she's got a map. And he comes back and says, I don't need a map. I have the GPS. Again, maps when they're more than a map. Next slide, thank you. Regulations in the permit. We'll move ahead. So permits don't exist without regulations. It's kind of one of those states that you can't have one without the other. So which regulations apply to your route? Federal, state, local, tribal, the list goes on and on. But not only do you have to realize the initial regulations, you have to also understand what I call the layered regulation: the environmental, the architectural, the historical, the ancestry, the wilderness. Um, Not to say we're going to lay fiber through the wilderness, um, but I put fiber. I didn't think I would put fiber before. It's possible. And with this one, we say permit without thought toward potential regulatory hurdles is like fishing with running shoes. You might catch one, but you're going to be sitting there a while. Next slide. Finally, human elements of regulations. You have to understand the agency or agencies responsible for processing the permit. You have to understand how they work, what they're doing. We have to request meetings with personnel, seek additional information on regulations, process, and unpublished issues. My go-to is go in and say, hey, I'm the stupidest guy here. Can you help me understand this? And most people are very helpful, and they'll try and help you get through whatever needs to be done. But that initial and that ongoing conversation, one of the things you will run into is going to your permitting agency and say, hey, we put this permit, what about? A lot of times you might get pushed a little further back than you like. Start early, start off, keep going back often. Heck, take a cup of coffee and spend the time. A little investment will go a long ways. Utilize or create relationship within permitting bodies to aid the process of permitting. Often those responsible for the permit can get just as frustrated with the process. They live with the process every day. They have to figure out, they have to abide by the processes, and believe me, they get just as frustrated, if not more so sometimes than we do. On this one, understanding of the requirements and the intent are often different things. I say that due to regulatory laws, everything gets rewritten or re-understood all the time. The intent of a regulation may not align with the requirement or vice versa. Be aware of that and bring it up. Discuss it, because if you're having an issue, others might as well. Next slide, please. Thank you. Cooperation and collaboration. Again, offer your staff and expertise to help in the process. Nobody understands your business. Nobody understands fiber better than you do. So you won't likely be able to approve your own permit, but you can provide additional tools to help ease the load. And collaboration, as I stated a little earlier, as permitting pains become problematic for one, it's likely for all. So collaborate common problems and present them to the permitting agency. They may not know may not, and probably won't be able to do anything about it, but I bet they know who could. So get together and see what you can work through. And again, cross-team engagement fosters understanding. So again, the more you engage your own folks, the more you engage the permitting folks, everybody's going to have a better understanding. Next slide, please. So step 4. So this is fostering permitting success. So initial steps of the application. So much information is needed to issue a permit request that volumes of informations and intentions must be captured and presented. Know this before you apply. Know what they need: environmental impact statements, maps, traffic studies, other utility impacts, financial statements or stability, post-installation recovery. This is kind of a rare one, but foliage impact. People want to see their fall colors. Don't mess with that. Outline and design of project, and many, many more depending on the area. I've seen basically seen a permit application on nothing more than a note card, as well as a 40-page volume. You just need to know what you need to send before you get there. Next slide, please. Initial steps in the application. While your team assembles and researches, utilize community outreach, local government relations, and share upcoming plans to deploy the fiber. Explain the project. Demonstrate the public benefit. Again, I'm fascinated with what Gary brought up about the impact on rural America. Engage the permitting agency prior to permit application submission. And once submitted, keep communicating. Don't just set it and forget it. And I throw this in there that, you know what? We all love grandma's cookies, but even she set the timer. Next slide, please. Application submittal and beyond. Again, no one likes to feel like yesterday's newspaper lining the bottom of the cat box. Permitting personnel are no different. You know, they like donuts, not only during your permitting process, but yeah, on their birthday. That's a good thing. Maintaining relationships started with permitting agencies and government to continue to collaborate on the importance of successful permitting. Again, once you open the door, don't be afraid to step back through it. Invite permitting agencies, government personnel to your company. Have a little show and tell. And I can assure you, it's much easier to show how a directional drill works than try to explain it. Most of all, have fun with it. Permitting is hard enough for both sides of the house. Make it easy. It's never easy. But, you know, it's a whole lot easier to walk into the dentist office with a smile on your face than not. Next slide, please. So, to summarize, we're going to look at the 4 steps to navigating the permitting process. 1, analyze the fiber route and permitting requirements. Basically, just like anything, know what you're getting into before you jump off that cliff. 2nd, build proposed route maps with land ownerships, easement records. Again, take a look around. Don't just assume that that highway right-of-way is the best option. It may not be. Understanding the regulations. Again, just like anything, you get into it, understand it, look past it, take the time, and take a little self-reliance to help those to help you, specifically in the permitting office. Lastly, foster a community to ease the process for all. I say this again, as previous experience, you get it all, you understand. But the one thing that your state broadband agent or your state broadband leaders have access to is things that you may not. Things you might have access to, but not to that level. We were able to get one certain 3-letter federal land owner's permit pushed through, and granted it had been started already. They ran into issues and they called me and said, "Hey, what is going on?" I'm like, "I don't know. Let me see what I can do." Called my contacts, and within 2 phone calls, we were at the head of this 3-letter agency. And guess what? You know, what had taken a year and a half, 2 years for them to try and process, we were able to resolve in less than 60 days. Got it done. They were on the road, and guess what? We planted fiber right where they wanted it. So don't be afraid to get out there. You know, keep the conversation open. Start early, talk often, and follow up. Again, it's a community thing. Make it all happen, and it'll go. And finally, I got to throw a little Wyoming in everywhere I can. So here we go. Permits? We don't need no stinking permits. But yet, even the Old West is not the Wild West anymore. So, next slide, please. So that is my presentation on the 4 steps to navigating the permit process successfully. Again, as Gary mentioned, we'll have a question and discussion. Have any questions, please contact me. Again, I appreciate your time. It's been a pleasure, and I'll turn it back to Gary.
Ryan, I didn't realize you're so witty. I enjoy your humor. So how does, the permitting, there's so many different agencies, so complex. As you said, you need a PhD to navigate to this. How should companies, operators look to expert organizations like yours to help them navigate through this whole process?
The biggest thing looking back towards us is and I understand everybody's running lean and mean, trying to get things done. Everybody's, working, getting all their fiber in the ground. And you can look towards us that have the relationships, have a lot of this stuff established and say, "Hey, guys, we really want to do this. We just don't have the bandwidth to do this on our own. Can you help us out?" And absolutely. That's where our organizations step in. Finley's been here over 70 years, so we've got very many long-running relationships across the country to help with this exact situation.
So Lou Michael had offered in on the chat that it also helps to ask what format the permitting office prefers. So if you can do that without too big a lift, it's worth the goodwill. Have you kind of witnessed that?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It goes all the way from and again, for being from Wyoming, we design on bar napkins and tabletops, and we've seen submissions like that. But definitely it helps. Again, talking early, say, hey, what's the best way to do this? Is it just a PDF? Do you have a process? And even if they don't have a process, and this is where the rural comes in, and I'll try and make this brief, is they may not have one. So if you're experienced or have other areas, say, hey, ask for this and this and this in a PDF format or in some kind of a format that they can use. Google Earth is one that's, I don't like it, but it's free. And it's something that even the smallest single person town hall can look at and understand what you're trying to do. But yes, uh, reach out, see what's going to help them best. And if they don't have an idea, maybe spend a little time and help them adapt or help them understand.
FBA, we had a permitting summit at Georgetown Law School, and with Jill Springer of NTIA, and we had Benton Institution, and the Georgetown Law School, and service providers and mayors, and federal, state, and local um, stakeholders, even broadband offices. And I put in the chat the outcome of that, the key findings, and so forth. But one of the things that really struck me is visibility, and just what is your observation of how many permitting offices are using digital applications versus having to do some kind of paper process? And then also the big issue with operators is just having visibility to where things are in the process, because obviously they need to know where their workforce needs to be, when and where, and be able to do their planning. And if they have no idea when their thing's going to get approved, what's your take on that?
Yeah, and it does vary, and you're correct. Some of them are paper, and the smaller, and I say some are paper. Our largest town in Wyoming's or a middle town or median town is 2,000 people, so there's a lot of paper. But once you step past that, there's a lot of them that are getting more familiar with with various electronic forms. You might have to fill it out in a Word document or whatever, but then ultimately it gets sent in as a PDF, and then they can use that information from there. So we're seeing a lot more electronic submittals, a lot more electronic interaction. The one thing that we don't see is basically your pizza timer. You make the order and you watch the timer as to when it's going to get to your house. That just doesn't exist in the permitting world. Again, you throw the permit in, it's in the oven, and most of the time it comes out burnt. But but there is no specific viewpoint of figuring out where the process is, and this is where the relationships come in. If you're just calling, bugging them, or asking them, out of the blue, hey, where's my permit? What's going on? Can you give me an update? You might get blown off a little more than if you have took the time initially and said, hey, this is Ryan with the fiber company. I'm coming in, initially, and keep that option open. Again, they can't take free, they can't take donations, but they can take donuts and coffee. And believe me, $20 in donuts and coffee once a month goes a long ways when it comes to understanding where your permitting process may be.
At some of our regional conferences, the lawyers that deal in permitting talk a lot about donuts and coffee. So I can imagine some of those permitting offices um, have a lot to eat there. Hey, so one of the things, audience question is, what can a subcontractor do to help ISPs with permitting?
As a subcontractor, basically take the lead from the folks that hired you. And again, everybody's at such a low bandwidth trying to get everything done. Offer up to them what you can do, and you can do just as much as they can, engaging with the people, engaging with the permitting process, checking in, fostering that relationship for your contractor. even though it's not your contract. You can do just the same as them. You just need to work with them, get their permission first, and then of course follow up and let them know how it went.
Well, Ryan, we really appreciate it. Permitting's the long pole in the tent, so we want. I think it's really important, and glad you shared best practices on permitting. And we really appreciate everything that you and Finley are doing to get every American connected with fiber. So thank you very much. And I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and look forward to get back together next Wednesday. We're going to be joined by Amanda Shearer from Adtran, Brian Snyder from DXTEL, and Matt Fowler from Triangle MLS. Discuss the benefits of fiber for real estate and economic development. So you're not going to want to miss that. So thanks, everyone. We'll see you guys next Wednesday. Also, join me in an hour and a half, noon Eastern time, to talk about LEO satellites and BEAD on Drew Clark's Broadband Breakfast. Thanks, everyone.